All right, guys, welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here on 2024 preview and prediction for the Oregon Ducks. Looking at this coaching staff: Dan Lanning, 22-5 through 2 seasons. Will Stein, Junior Adams, offensive coordinators, Tosh LaPoy and Chris Hampton manning the defensive side of the ball. The Ducks come up just shy of a CFP berth, going 0-2 to Washington a year ago in the 4th-ranked incoming recruiting class, and also a massive portal haul as well. Ducks having a phenomenal off-season. You look at the offensive side of the ball, Nick. I was very excited to see this offense, and it's a big reason why I wanted to see them in the playoffs, but they didn't earn it. They were, outdid by a better offense in Washington. These guys were still great. Over 44 points per game is phenomenal. First in passing yards per game. They had great balance with their rushing attack. This was just a pretty flawless unit from top to bottom. They returned 6 starters. Their top rusher, Bucky Irving, is gone. They do get back 4 of their top 5 pass catchers, and even added a good one as well. And, Dylan Gabriel's the guy who's going to come over, and he's going to look to man this unit, looking to, be a perfect replacement of sorts for Bo Nix. This is a guy who's a great competitor. He's shown enough arm strength to drive throws downfield. Good mechanics allows him to stay in phase. Throws a good touch outside the numbers, really showcased his ability to thrive as a runner this past season as well, with some nice speed and burst. The ability to make full field reads as well. He's only 5'11", 204, so the size isn't all that. Arm strength does appear a bit maxed out. Velocity does seem to waver when he's off platform. Often can be tad slow when working through his reads as well. This is as veteran as you get. This is his 3rd different school. He was great at UCF. Was great for Oklahoma. Now he ends up in what seems to be a perfect situation here at Oregon to try and win a ring.
Dylan Gabriel's a really incredibly talented player, a very experienced player in college football at this point in time. The 23-year-old has been around the game for a while. 5'11", 205 is the size. We know him pretty well from his time at UCF, where he became, a national sensation prior to that leg injury where he broke his leg and severely damaged his leg in a game against Louisville, and that was a very, very painful issue for him as well. Clavicle was broken. Really was a tough thing to see against Louisville at the end of that 2021 season. That ended his season very early. He had been solid in 2020 and 2019. It was 9-3 in 2019, 6-4 in 2020 as the starter. Had some really solid stats in 2020. He had 32 touchdowns and 4 picks, 27 touchdowns to 9 picks in 2019. Got to Oklahoma after missing some time with that injury and looked good through 2 seasons. 25-6 was the ratio in 2022, and 30-6 was the ratio last year. 3,600 yards and a 69% comp rate last year, so very accurate with the ball. One of his better comp rates throughout his entire tenure previously. At UCF, he hovered around that 60 mark, so a 9% jump at Oklahoma and a 7% jump from his 2022 62% comp rate. So he's improved over time, has gotten better. Also had 12 rushing touchdowns last year. Really did employ those legs a lot more often than he had in the past. 373 yards on the ground, career highs for him in those 2 numbers. And now he plugs into this offense that was really dynamite last year. Nearly 350 yards passing per game, and had incredible balance, being able to be 30th in the nation in rushing. When you look at a passing attack like that, typically they're not very balanced, and they don't run the ball very well. They taper off in the run game, but Oregon had a really nice balanced rushing attack with Bucky Irving and the other backs in that room. Now Nix is gone, now Irving is gone, now Gabriel steps in, and the other running backs in that running back room we'll get to in a second have to step up and see if they can lead this offense to a similar type of production.
Irving departs, but I think Jordan James is going to be a superstar. I absolutely loved watching him play last year. A slippery, bouncy runner. Really does well getting to the edge. Love the vision. Some nice long speed as well. 5'10", 205 pounds. Can make guys miss between the tackles. Has nice coordination in the lower half to stay upright. I think James is just going to be phenomenal this year after averaging over 7 yards per carry a season ago, along with 11 touchdowns. And obviously Nix was a big part of this rushing game. At least when it came to the red zone, they certainly didn't use his legs as much as we anticipated this past season. Wanted to keep him healthy, and it certainly worked. A guy they're hoping can stay at full strength. Noah Whittington, nice vision and instincts on zone concepts. Has some quick feet to help change direction. Obviously, he was a good player for Western Kentucky in the past. Only played 4 games last year. They had Jay Harris from Northwest Missouri State. The biggest back on the roster, 6'2", 215 pounds. Had good production, was an All-American at the FCS level. Jaden Lamar, a young player who has some nice juice as a runner. Can be used in the pass game as well. Pretty strong room here, Nick. Obviously, this is going to be James's backfield. How will he do with an amplified amount of touches? Only had 107 this past year. But I think this guy's going to be elite this season. I think he's going to be an All-American in the Big Ten.
I certainly think he can be elite this year. 760 yards on the ground last year, 7.1 yards per carry, 11 scores from as well. 15 receptions out of the backfield, including a touchdown as well. So he's a dual threat back. You can use him a lot. Noah Whittington, if he's fully healthy, only played in 4 games last year, but was efficient in those 4 games with 146 yards rushing, 7.3 yards per carry, and 2 scores. You highlighted the other 2 backs they have in this room as well. I think it's a very deep running back room. As they transition to the Big Ten, you would like to see them carry the ball a little bit more. You want to see if they can have that sort of ground attack that's comparable to other Big Ten programs. I think this room is really solid with the guys they have here. I think James leading the line, really solid size, really bouncy runner, very solid running back room, in my opinion.
And you move to the pass-catching group that, again, they return 4 of the top 5. Leading pass catcher Troy Franklin departs after an elite season where he averaged over 100 yards per game. But there's no need to worry here. They had Evan Stewart, who's the top-ranked player in the portal from A&M. Slim, athletic pass catcher at 6', 175. Good hands to win in traffic. Great in-air body control. Very good athlete in space. Good run-after-catch abilities. He can weave through traffic with ease. Smooth adjuster of good hand-eye coordination. Stewart's going to be phenomenal. And they return Tez Johnson, a vastly undersized player at 5'10", 160. But that leads to great quickness. Has a slew of moves that make him very difficult to bring down. Dynamic slot option here with good shiftiness. Great ball security from him as well. And you look at the other guys, Trayshawn Holden provided some good play at times, mainly made big plays over the last 2 years. They want to see him evolve into a more consistent pass catcher, though, not just a big play gamer. Gary Bryant, he has the speed, but he was banged up most of this past year. Still ended up with nearly 450 yards, though. Jerion Dickey, 6'2", 215, a player that should find the field this season. He was a high-ranked recruit. Kyle Casper, 6'6", 205, has some problems with his frame. And, of course, there he's turned a nice tight end, and Terrence Ferguson had 42 grabs for over 400 yards. This is a highly productive passing game last year, Nick. They had 6 different guys with 400-plus yards, and that does include a guy at tight end in Ferguson and Irving at running back. So the variety here is absurd. I don't think it's going to change one bit. They're going to continue to load up on production. This is just unheard of, Nick. They were first nationally in passing. They get everybody back, and they probably get back even. They probably are even better with the addition of Stewart, wouldn't you think?
This is an incredible offensive wide receiving room, an incredible offense top to bottom, a really good wide receiving room that really does add a star player in Stewart. It didn't really work out for him at A&M. He didn't have quite the production that we were hoping for when he was a high-level recruit at a high school, but he's still a guy that has so much untapped potential. Top player in the portal, ends up committing to the Ducks. Last year he had 415 yards, or 515 yards receiving, that is. 4 touchdowns for him last year, 13.5 yards per catch. So solid numbers, but nothing incredible. Wasn't targeted a whole lot. Now we should expect to get a lot more targets. Tez Johnson, they return over 1,000 yards receiving production there, 1,100 yards for him exactly, 13.7 yards per grab, and 10 scores for him. Trayshawn Holden, the former Bama player, 452 yards receiving, 12.2 yards per grab, and 6 scores for him. A nice deep play threat, Gary Bryant, 442 yards receiving, 14.7, and 4 scores. Then Ferguson, your typical tight end, 415, 9.9, and 6 scores for him. Nice balance, a lot of different variety here. This is a very incredibly talented, very deep wide receiver room that has a lot of guys on the bench that could step up as well that weren't involved last year. A lot to look forward to, a lot to like if you're an Oregon Ducks fan.
You look at an offensive line, the one that's been very sturdy for a couple of years, all the way back to the Cristobal days, and that's continued here in Lanning's tenure. You start with 2 great tackles, Johnny Cornelius. A lot of people wanted him in last year's cycle. The Ducks got him at 6'5", 308. Moves very well for his size. He can pull and get out in front with ease. Use his length and size to his advantage. Has good recovery when he gets beat on reps. Allowed 0 sacks this past year in his jump to FBS ball over there on the right tackle spot. On the left side, Josh Connerly, this is a guy who's a 5-star recruit. Great change of direction ability, high-end athlete with nice, fast feet. Hands and strength need to continue to improve. This is a player that only allowed 1 sack this past season. I think he'll continue to improve, especially with consistency. You look at the other guys, they're going to fill out here. They added a 6-year player, Matthew Bedford. He's progressed quite well with Indiana. Has progressed immensely in pass blocking. Still has his inconsistencies. Has been a quality run blocker, though, at 6'6", 305 pounds. He should start at the right guard spot. Left guard will be anchored by Marcus Harper. After starting 2 straight seasons, he's been really great in pass protection for them. Also needs to show more pop in the ground game, though, at 6'3", 325. And a player they really like at center. You lose Jackson Powers-Johnson. Alpani Laulu played 100-plus snaps at all 3 spots on the interior offensive line as a true freshman. 4-star in last year's class. The staff is clearly very high on him. He has an incredible ceiling. This is an offensive line that is incredibly difficult to crack, Nick. Again, when you lose a guy like Powers Johnson, things could get really bad for most programs, but not for the Ducks.
this is an offensive line that has some really solid players. Cornelius was a great add out of Rhode Island last year in the cycle. He lived up to the expectations in year one previously out of Westchester County, New York, where he played his high school football from the New York City area. A really strong physical right tackle. That was a great add from Rhode Island and really looked comfortable in that jump up from the FCS to the FBS level. Really talented player in general. Josh Cornerly, a really good left tackle, a good veteran leader, good some snaps there. Marcus Harper, another veteran leader that's got some good snaps. This is a really solid left side of the line you're looking at here as well. The center, I'm not really worried about replacing the center. I think they do have a nice plug and play center there, a bit younger obviously, but still a guy that can really step up and replace Powers Johnson. This is a very strong offensive line that has some really solid, big physical players in the trenches.
The offensive verdict for the Ducks, losing Nick's and some of his supporting cast stings, but this team is more than equipped to overcome those losses. Gabriel has always produced and seems to be a great fit for an offense with phenomenal weapons and a great O-line that returns 2 high ceiling tackles and some good promise overall in the interior line. One of the nation's best offenses, and again, I want to point out Jordan James is going to be tremendous for them. We had the defensive side of the ball, obviously, in year one under Lanning, they weren't very good. No one was concerned, and they certainly took massive steps this past year. They added 8 guys in the portal. They lost 10. Return only 4 starters, creating negative plays. Wasn't always ideal for them. They had 34 sacks, but 18 of them came versus the 3 worst offensive lines in America. Teams like Stanford and Colorado, for example, they only had 9 sacks over the last 7 games of the year, Nick. And that's not going to be ideal when you're trying to beat a Washington team that had Michael Penix and all those pass catchers. And you look at this defensive line, Jordan Birch, a veteran, proved to be a quality run defender. His progression slowed in terms of pass rushing ability. Great frame, though, 6'6", 270. Mateo Uyungale got good bit of time as a true freshman. A guy who has agility, length, and good power. Should allow him to really mold into a quality edge this year. Taitum Teoti struggled in his time as a true freshman. 2 top 40 recruits in Aiden Braylon and Elijah Rushing that will join the fold. A lot of impressive talent at defensive end. The interior defensive line. They feature 2 incredible transfers. Derek Harmon from Michigan State was highly sought after. Great run defender in the middle at 325 pounds. And then another 325-pounder in Jamari Caldwell from Houston has been great versus the run and even pitched in 6.5 sacks this past season. Keon Ware-Hudson has been around a long time, it seems. Quality rotational defensive tackle. Amari Washington didn't play much, but has outstanding stature, 6'3", 330, some versatility as well. Also landed 4-star Terrence Green in last year's class, 6'5", 315. Another big body they can throw into the fold. No reason for the run defense to not compete as one of the nation's best. This pass rush is certainly concerning, Nick, and I think, long-term they'll be okay. But this past season, again, it was awful. They beat up on bad O-lines, Colorado, Stanford, Washington State. Other than that, they couldn't really generate much, and that caused them to lose against Washington. They had, 3 sacks in those 2 games. I guess that's solid, right? But you need more when your secondary is going against those caliber of pass catchers, and that's what costed him a CFP berth at the end of the day, I would say.
The lack of pass rush is certainly concerning and is the one thing you want to highlight on this defense, and it's one thing you want to highlight on this team as a whole is can they figure out where they can get the pass rush from? Is there going to be a way that some of these guys can step up? I think Jordan Birch is a really solid player, 34 total tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks for him. But outside of him, the returning sack production doesn't really exist there. There's not a whole lot of returning production in general on this front part of this defensive line. Lacks that returning production. Ungale, 18 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks for him. Decent numbers. Keon Ware-Hudson is a guy that's been around for a while, 21 total tackles plus 1 each in terms of sacks and tackles for loss for him. They made some moves in the portal, added some different guys to try and find some pressure, but I'm worried about this team's ability to get in the backfield and get after the quarterback.
Yeah, that pass rush was a concern. And Washington and Dylan Johnson, they just throttled them in the Pac-12 title game. We saw it firsthand, Nick, where they were elite all year long against the run, and they got gashed in that one. And these deficiencies caused them, again, a national championship opportunity, but I think they've certainly made the adequate adjustments in terms of players they brought in via the portal and, of course, recruiting. So I think you're certainly going to see them uptick in that area, but they certainly also going to have to prove it as well. Can't just look at the pieces of paper and say it's going to happen. Looking at the middle of this defense, Justin Jacobs was hurt most of the year from Iowa. Didn't take the field until October 21st. Played the rest of the season. He was a pretty elite tackler. He didn't miss one all season. Will need to show some impact in coverage and against the run, though. Felt as if the move to linebacker would benefit Jeffrey Bassa last year, and it certainly did. His slimmer size allowed him to be fluid in coverage. Also proved to be a solid pass rusher and tackler. Jerry Mixon, an athletic player who's in the mix for a backup role. Devon Jackson played about 200 snaps, most of which came early in the year in blowouts. Amarian Winston was pretty good for them in terms of being tough versus the run and efficient as an outside linebacker. Another deep group here, just not as much experience as I'd say the defensive line might have. But what do you make of this group, Nick? Because I think you can certainly see a mixed bag where they have solid players, but Bassa, again, your best player is a converted defensive back. Jacobs does come from that, great coaching staff at Iowa. So I think there's a lot of upside here, but at the same time, I certainly would wish they had more of an impact player in the middle.
This certainly is a unit that has some solid players, but you do kind of miss that standout star player. Bassa, 72 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, a pick, 6 for him last year, plus a pass breakup. Devon Jackson, 17 total tackles. Justin Jacobs, 32 total tackles, plus 1 each in terms of sacks and tackle for loss for him. There are some solid players. I think Bassa and Jacobs are 2 solid players, plus you plug Jackson as a rotational piece. Jerry Mixon is in that roster rotational spot as well. Didn't see a whole lot of him last year. Can this unit figure it out? I think this is a unit that has some decent players, but they lack that big headline player at linebacker. Could be an issue against the run later in the season.
And now you look at a secondary that adds Jabbar Muhammad from Washington. This guy was one of the nation's best corners, a patient, instinctive man cover corner. Has great motor, which allows him to rack up ball production. 5'10", 183, does need to improve his tackling, eye discipline as well, as he can often stare into the backfield, and that aforementioned size could be a concern versus bigger wide receivers. This is a secondary largely made up of transfers, though. You pick up Cam Alexander from UTSA, has good speed's been a nice coverage asset in all 4 years at the collegiate level. First 3 years for him came at Sam Houston State. Only allowed a 48% completion rating this past year, likely to occupy the other starting cornerback spot. Brandon Johnson, a real underrated add. He was a very skilled weapon in the slot for Duke, and Mike Elko, a player that can fly into the backfield and also hold up in coverage. Kobe Savage from Kansas State. He's going to fill in at safety. 3 picks each of the last 2 years. Needs to get better in most key areas, though, but has played a lot of snaps the last couple seasons. Tasheem Johnson, the only guy that really seems to be returning from last year's roster that has a guaranteed starting role, was solid in the slot. Was mainly a standout versus the run, but showed some nice ball skills as well. Looks to occupy, again, a full-time safety role. They have some vets in the rotation, guys like Jaleel Florence, Nico Reed, Dante Manning. Good secondary, but one that had its fair share of issues on occasion, getting dominated again by Washington twice. Wazoo had 400-plus yards, and that is a game where the pass rush did show up. I know they're playing from behind for the most part, but, that was an offense that really went stagnant at times, especially in the middle of the year, Nick, and for, the Cougars to be able to do that against them certainly isn't beautiful. Want to see these corners be more physical, safeties cover the middle of the field better. What do you make of this back end, again, that's largely just made up of transfers? And you do have some veterans, but what kind of impact will they have?
A lot of transfers here. There are 4 guys that played snaps for this team last year in the secondary, starting with Johnson, who had 70 total tackles. Your second returning highest tackle getter behind Bassa. He had 7 pass breakups and 2 picks as well, 4.5 tackles for loss. Florence, 27 total tackles. Manning, 25 total tackles. Reed, 25 total tackles. Manning had 6 pass breakups. Reed had 7, so both of them are pretty solid in coverage. Manning also had a pick last year. Then you bring in Muhammad, who is one of the nation's best players in the secondary, a really incredible corner, really good man coverage, really solid player. Yes, the tackling is a bit of a concern, but in general, I still think Muhammad was a very sought-after player for a reason, right? He's an incredibly talented player that you can plug in that corner. Cam Alexander's a really underrated good add from UTSA, and Kobe Savage, can he continue to develop and turn into the player that we thought he was going to be, hitting the new school here coming from Kansas State? This is a unit that's a lot of plug-and-play. I wonder if that's going to be okay for this team. They were not great against the pass compared to the rest of their defensive side of the ball, right? They were 54th in the nation against the pass, while they were 11th, 22nd, and 9th in the other big categories. 215 yards per game given up through the air. I do think this unit is solid. I just don't know if there's going to be a lot of improvement.
And outside of Washington, and I guess if you want to count the Cougars, Texas Tech in week 2, nobody really had success against this unit. They were a legit ball club. Obviously, at Utah, I expected them to win that game handily, and they did, but they only held them to 6 points. That was very impressive. Colorado, we expected them to get blown out as well in that game, but they were red hot coming into that one. Nick also held them to 6 points. USC didn't play very well on offense. Oregon State was held to 7 points, an offense that's certainly capable of attacking you with balance. So this defense, they really played well against some very quality opponents, and even in the bowl game against Liberty, held them to 6 points, which happened on the first drive of the game. Nothing the remainder of the contest. So this defense certainly played very good against very good opponents. And I think, you look at the verdict for this side of the ball. The landing effect has taken shape in Eugene, and following the inability to slow down Washington, they got to work, adding lots of DBs, great big bodies to slow down the run, and on top of all the incoming freshmen. This is a very good unit here. I want to see the secondary play with some more pop, and of course that linebacking group become more forceful, like obviously the Georgia Bulldogs defense as he coach did. I think the depth is great across the board, though. Look at the prediction for Oregon. This is a team that's going to get plenty of hype generating into the Big Ten. Schedule's kind of soft. It's not the toughest by any means. At Michigan's going to be difficult. Maybe at Wisconsin, something they're not used to. But they play plenty familiar foes. Oregon State, UCLA's in there, and of course Washington. Dan Lanning looking to go over that hump, and I think he will. I think this team's going to be very good this year, Nick. Top to bottom, they're just standouts. I think Ohio State's going to be too much to crack, and I just think that the defense for the Buckeyes is going to travel to Eugene, and they're going to pitch a pretty nice outing. I think it's going to be a close game, of course. Big opportunity for them to go undefeated, though, Nick, if they can beat Ohio State. I think this team will likely make the college football playoff. Obviously, we still have a lot of teams to preview, but if I had to guess, this team's going to get penciled in, but the strength of schedule might hurt them. And also, going on the road, I'm pretty sure it's a Friday night they play Purdue. That's not great, Nick. I don't care who you are. We have seen in the past Purdue will blow your lights out, and they'll end your season right there on a night game.
Dreams go to die in West Lafayette, and certainly Oregon's dream may die against Purdue on October 18th. A game certainly important to highlight. This Purdue team's been known to knock teams out of playoff contention. Everyone remembers the big upset against Ohio State, but they beat other teams as well. They played Penn State close there in the past couple of years. So certainly a game to circle. I'd be interested to see what the spread is on that game when we get closer to that date and time. Certainly a game you want to take a look at. People forget that Oregon did beat Ohio State the last time these two teams played in Columbus in what was a pretty important win for the Ducks in that moment in time. Will they win this year? I think Ohio State just has enough to beat them on October 12th. The rest of the schedule is pretty cut and dry. Maybe at Michigan could be a tougher game playing at the Roadhouse the Big House on the road, that is, in the fall. That's a bit different for them. They're not really used to that, but I do think they have enough energy to beat that Michigan team. And then Washington, Dan Lanning has struggled against Washington. He struggled against them last year, losing twice to them, but with a new coaching staff, a completely revamped team, I think they'll be able to beat the Huskies pretty handily, even though they did play for a college national championship last year. Overall, pretty solid schedule in terms of, if you're a Ducks fan, you got to like the schedule. I think these are all very winnable games outside of the game against Ohio State. This is a very good team that's going to put up a ton of points. Is the middle linebacking core going to be okay? Is the secondary going to be all right with all those plug-and plays? Can they find a pass rush? Those are your big questions with this Oregon Ducks team. But you have no question about the offense. If the defense can figure it out, this team will be a very, very strong team come playoff time.
And I think the defense certainly will figure it out. They'll be improved compared to last year. But, like you said, that juggernaut they faced last year in Washington, they lost both those games by 3 points. It was just too much to overcome. I think that's certainly something the defense has to figure out. And obviously, it doesn't look like they have too many tests in terms of elite offenses. Ohio State, they're probably going to be borderline elite. But other than that, you're not facing too many tough units here on the schedule. Nick, should be very favorable matchups for this defense. I definitely think this is a great team. And teams like Oregon, like last year, I'm not even an Oregon fan, Nick, and I was rooting for them to get to the playoffs because they were just so exciting to watch them play with all they had. And the same goes for this year. Dylan Gabriel's a very exciting player. The supporting cast is also very notable. And like you said, we're trying to figure out, the chess pieces when it comes to the defense, seeing what they can accomplish is also very interesting. So this is a very fun team to watch regardless of who you root for.
This is a very exciting team, and now they make the transition to Big Ten. I think they're prime to be competitive for a Big Ten title potentially in year one. A team that Dan Lanning has built together. He stayed in Oregon despite interest from Alabama, brings in Dylan Gabriel at quarterback, brings in some solid transfers in Mohammed and Stewart, two of the best players in the portal, and continues to build a really solid roster. There's a lot of young players that are very talented. Excited to watch this Ducks team play this year.
For today's episode, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.